Welcome, everybody, to today's fireside chat. I'll be your host, Marlon Ruiz. I'm excited to welcome our guest, Steven Goldfeder from Offchain Labs. Steven is currently the CEO and co-founder of Offchain Labs. In the before time, he got his PhD at Princeton University, his postdoc at Cornell, and he also wrote a book in 2018 on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency technologies. He is a co-inventor of Picnic Signature Scheme. He worked additionally at that time on multi-party computing. My favorite part is that he was a Google intern in the summer of 2013, and 2014, and 2015. Steven, welcome to the chat.
Hey, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for coming. It's great to be here.
So let's get started. And I usually like to know an origin story. That seems to be the topic of the day to start with. So I'm going to kind of twist that a little bit and start with a question maybe that's more meaningful. So I think on everyone's mind, they're all wondering, when moon? So, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So anyway, really, I do want to twist that question a little bit and kind of say, Steven, you've done all these things. You've even done a talk at Google for BTC in 2015. You've done the book scheme. You've done all these other things. Like, why are you the right person now to help take on the challenges of crypto and finance in the world that we're living in today?
Yeah, it's definitely. Firstly, hello everyone. Great to be here. And as Marlon referenced, I remember back, I think during my third internship, I gave a talk on Bitcoin internally, which was early on then. So I'm sure if you go and find that somewhere in the dust that talk off, you can find it. It won't be very relevant today, but I've been in this space for just about a decade now, actually. So I started my PhD in Princeton in 2013, and here we are in 2023. So, and got interested in Bitcoin and technologies early on. And it's incredible to see, I think, all the growth as an industry. Like, I definitely never imagined, even a decade later, that there would be the amount of awareness and mainstream accessibility and interest in building on cryptocurrencies, building on the blockchain, which we've seen today, which is really fantastic to see. Obviously, crypto, it's a big industry. There are a lot of really smart people building in the space, a lot of really great companies, including Google Cloud in particular, that are contributing to this space as well. And I think, though, there's a lot more to do. We're very early on, despite everything I just said, of how far we've come, and definitely blown past my wildest dreams a decade ago. I think we're still very early on for the ultimate vision of bringing this technology to the more people, and really allowing people to leverage and benefit from the benefits of decentralized technology in many different realms. So, I've always been excited about building things. In particular, even as a researcher, my excitement was always about building near-term things or products or ideas that could get into production on a relatively short timeline to impact people's daily lives in the near future. And I think that's what drives me, and that's why I'm still in this space a decade later, and incredibly excited to be here. I don't know if I'd say I'm the right person, because again, it takes an army to really do this, but I'm definitely going to dedicate my time and be one of those people that are doing our best to build this technology. And the one thing I'll say is, one thing that's important to me and important to us at Offchain Labs is the focus on real decentralization and real security. Because what happens is, over time, as you go from the niche builders who are really passionate about the underlying technology to more mainstream awareness and adoption, some of the values can dilute. Right. So what I mean by that is people entering today might just come into this space because they want to buy a really cool NFT, but they don't actually necessarily don't care or aren't aware of some of the early values and the reasons of why we're building this technology, and why you're not just buying that NFT on eBay or the like. And so I think one of the things that are important to me and important to us at Offchain Labs is to really preserve the focus of decentralization as a goal. The focus on security as an not for compromised, not only a goal, but in the fabric of everything we build, security has to be baked in from day one. And it's something which, over time, I think dilute and for different reasons, different projects make different compromises sometimes, but that's something which is very important to us to say, hey, how can we do all this? How can we support mainstream adoption and mainstream bandwidth, which is non-trivial, while still maintaining the decentralization and security? And that's really what the idea behind Arbitrum is. Ethereum is wonderful from a security and decentralization perspective. From a scaling perspective, it needed something more. And how can we scale but not dilute those core values? And that's what's always inspired me personally. And when I continue to contribute to this space, that's core in our thinking.
That's wonderful. Thank you for your answer on that. I appreciate the context there. I do find it fascinating that you've been playing in the space, and a lot of the things you've worked on, like multi-party, computing, is something that's a thing today, right? And it may be different than what you thought of before, but you were there in thought leadership in the beginning. So really appreciate your efforts. It is definitely not a one-person army game, but definitely appreciate you sharing, why you think that you're adding the value to the ecosystem. I'd like to actually go ahead and drill in a little bit more about Arbitrum. There are many folks who may know Arbitrum, but there's probably an equal number that don't. Can you just give us the TLDR, what is Arbitrum, why does it exist? Just a little bit of background on that, please.
Absolutely. So it ties back to that thing that I just said, which is, when we all got excited initially in 2015 about Ethereum and smart contracts, the technology was super powerful and that was obvious to everyone. But there was also a problem that, the academic literature propped up right away, actually, even before Ethereum went live, which is these designs don't scale to mainstream adoption. So they're fine today being, 2015, say, when they're just ideas and no one's using them. But one of two things are going to happen. Either the technology is going to go away and no one's going to use it, it's never going to catch on, or it's going to catch on. But then there's going to be a bandwidth issue, which leads to a pricing issue, because that's how you price limited capacity. But then it also leads to a UX problem, right? If the prices go up, and we've seen this happen on Ethereum many, many times, over the years in different cycles, where the prices go up really high, they make the network unusable. And obviously, that's not a good starting point for a network that we believe should and can support, really billions of users at scale, in time. And the question then is, how can we go ahead and make Ethereum accessible, make this core technology accessible to developers to build applications, but applications that will be usable by users at the price point that actually makes sense, right? So you might say, take gaming as an example. Hey, let's build a game on the blockchain. That's great, but if your game is going to require you to pay, even dollars per and forget about tens or hundreds or thousands of dollars, but even single dollars per online transaction, and you have a fully on-chain game, that's going to be a big problem. It's not going to be a very fun game, to say the least. And this is true really across different verticals. You could take DeFi or decentralized finance. If you are a whale and you're trading really, really large values, sure, maybe even a fee of $100 will be fine for you because you're trading maybe billions of dollars. But if you're an average user that wants to go ahead and send money and transact or trade, maybe tens of dollars, a fee in the hundreds of dollars certainly not going to work. A fee in the single dollars won't work. A fee of 50 cents might not work. And then therefore, the idea is, how do we make this inclusive? Inclusive has different realms. Inclusive for developers, so they have the tools that they need. Inclusive for users, that can mean users in different geographies, because me sitting in the US, what's a low fee for me might be different from someone from a different part of the world, and we want this to be accessible globally, and also usable for inclusive for different applications. Like we said, a DeFi low fee might be very, very different than what a gaming company considers a fee that's workable for it. So the question was, how can we bring Ethereum to the masses with these considerations in mind, and make the user experience, in particular the fees, but also the speed of transactions, usable? And that's where the idea of Arbitrum comes in. If you look back on YouTube, actually, for the very first mention of Arbitrum, you'll find the Princeton class video. This was an undergraduate class. The project was led by my co-founder, Ed Felton, who was actually before my involvement. And it was from the fall 2014 semester in Princeton, which was actually before Ethereum even launched. So like I said, in the academic context, these problems were really from the outset of the power of the technology, people understood the limitations as well. And, Ed, my co-founder, and soon later myself as well, we're thinking about this in an academic context. How do we scale these technologies? So what Arbitrum is what's called a layer 2 blockchain. And as its name suggests, layer 2, it's a blockchain that sits on top of another blockchain. And here, the core blockchain, the layer 1 blockchain, that bottom layer is Ethereum. And Arbitrum sits on top of that. And what it does is it takes a lot of the transaction, a lot of the execution off of Ethereum, but leaves just enough on Ethereum so that you can get to correctness, improve correctness on Ethereum, right? So it takes a lot of the computation off-chain. Our name is Offchain Labs. We take a lot of the computation and a lot of the storage, et cetera, off-chain, but leave just enough on Ethereum that if there's a dispute or if that you can prove the correctness of what happens off-chain on Ethereum. And this way we scale because actually you do a lot more off-chain than Ethereum could even validate. Ethereum cannot natively validate the amount of, say, computation that the Arbitrum 1 network does today. So then you say, well, one second, how do we get security derived from Ethereum if Ethereum can't even validate? And the concept that layer 2 blockchains like Arbitrum use is proving. And it turns out you can often prove more efficiently than you can actually execute. So rather than natively execute what I'm doing, we have a proving process. In Arbitrum's case, it uses an interactive fraud proof process where it's called an optimistic rollup because optimistically it assumes that things are correct. But anyone can go ahead and engage the fraud proof process if something is wrong. And the idea being that this is how it scales. So Ethereum doesn't natively need to verify everything, but you get the security of Ethereum because via the fraud-proof process, you go ahead and get to correctness. And apologies if I went into too much detail there, but yes, please.
Yeah, I guess I would just say, we hear a lot about ZK rollups. How does that differ from that?
Great question. So most of what I just said up until the very end is actually true for all rollups. So Arbitrum is in the class of rollups called optimistic rollups, and ZK rollups are a different class. They both do the same thing in the sense that they take computation off-chain, but they go ahead and prove back on-chain what they do. So how do they differ? They differ in the type of proofs that they use. ZK rollups use what's called the validity proof. What that means is I'll say, hey, Ethereum. They both put the data on chain. So the core transaction data, the compressed transaction data is on chain. It says, hey, Ethereum, I executed all these transactions off chain, and here is the result, right? Because you can think of transactions in two ways. Transactions are just like bits of information, but they're also what those bits mean. Like, hey, go ahead and add these numbers, execute this. So in all rollups, ZK and optimistic, they go ahead and put those bits of information off chain, the sort of dumb data on chain, and they go ahead and do the instructions, the execution off-chain, and they report the result back to Ethereum. And the question is, the difference between ZK rollups and optimistic rollups is where and when this proof happens, right? How do you convince Ethereum that what you're doing off-chain is correct? In both cases, the way you scale is by doing more off-chain than Ethereum can possibly natively execute. And in both cases, you want to prove to Ethereum the correctness. So ZK rollups do, I would say, the conceptually simpler thing, where when they give you a result, they say, here's a proof, a mathematical proof that this computation that I did off-chain is correct. It's called a validity proof. I give you a proof that it's valid. Whereas optimistic rollups do a different thing. They're an optimistic system, which means they try to save the work until it's really needed. So they go to Ethereum and say, hey, here's the computation I did off-chain. I'm not giving you any proof at all, actually. And a time window opens up. And if nobody challenges it during that time, it gets accepted. This is a typical and sort of optimistic system design. But if someone engages in the dispute process, then Ethereum can very, very efficiently validate what's correct. So in both cases, you're proving through Ethereum. How they differ is whether they give you a validity proof up front and do the work up front, or they optimistically don't give you a proof. But if someone challenges, they get to a proof. It's called a fraud proof, a proof of the incorrectness. And then you get to see, okay, which of these is correct. Obviously, there are a lot of differences that come out from there, and we can get into those if you want. But that's conceptually at the core, the basic technology level, how optimistic and ZK rollups different. It's all about how and what type of proof that they used.
Cool, thank you. I don't know that I've heard many explanations in that much detail for that, so I really appreciate the opportunity to hear that. When we think about decentralization and we think about openness, How do you make sure that everyone can be a validator, or open validation maybe is the better way to say that? How do you ensure that within your ecosystem?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's actually a very timely question. We recently released a new protocol called actually BOLD, and it's an acronym for Bounded Liquidity Delay, which I can get into. But the idea is it's a new challenge protocol. So the challenge protocol is this idea of, I mentioned that there are these fraud proofs, and you can go ahead and challenge. And the thing you want, the ultimate goal is that anyone in the world can challenge and say, hey, I disagree with that. And this is a lot actually stronger than a typical consensus algorithm. A typical consensus algorithm uses a voting structure. And typically you require a majority, like 2/3 plus of the people to vote in the correct way. And that's how they get to consensus. So that's how most layer 1 blockchains use. They use a voting algorithm basically. In rollups, in an optimistic rollup, you don't need a voting algorithm. Instead, Ethereum is the referee. So Ethereum itself has a voting algorithm as this consensus. It has its proof of stake. But as long as you trust Ethereum, you actually just need one person to sort of ring the alarm, and they can themselves guarantee correctness. So there might be 1,000 people driving one way, and you say, no, everyone's driving the wrong way. And Ethereum will actually, it's not a voting algorithm. Everyone could say A, but if B is correct, and this, the rules of the blockchain are encoded in Ethereum smart contract, Ethereum will actually say, no, everyone else is wrong. This one is correct. And it's a much, much stronger property than a vote. And that's how you derive your security from Ethereum. So you have this blockchain on a blockchain, but this blockchain actually, what it does is it uses Ethereum as a referee. And anyone who sort of rings that alarm can go ahead and engage in the challenge protocol. Today in Arbitrum 1, the challenge protocols, the fraud proofs are live. There is a permission set of entities that can actually go ahead and raise this flag. And it's about a dozen, and Google Cloud is actually one of those entities that's permissioned in the protocol and can actually raise those flags today, and it's actively validating the network. With the BOLD protocol that we just announced, it's open up to anyone in the world. Anyone can go ahead and ring that alarm and guarantee their own security. Arbitrum is controlled by a DAO, so it's up to we at Offchain Labs released this new protocol, but it's ultimately up to the DAO to decide whether or not they want to upgrade it and include it in the live chains. But if and when they do, then anyone will be able to go ahead and ring the alarm and engage in the challenge and fraud proof mechanism to validate or fully validate the protocol.
That's awesome. Thank you. If we think about how Arbitrum's been doing, it went mainnet earlier this year. It's in the top 5 for TVL and also for DEX volume, like as of today. I mean, what do you attribute your success to? Like, what is driving the users and developers to want to be part of your ecosystem, do you think?
So the Arbitrum ecosystem is very strong, I would say, among real crypto natives, people who are really believe in the values and the culture of crypto. Among DeFi, for example, Arbitrum is the leading ecosystem. You mentioned DEX volume. Arbitrum is generally number 2 or number 3, with Ethereum being number 1. Usually it's Ethereum, Arbitrum, BSC, generally in the top 3 slots there for DEX volume. And DeFi, our Arbitrum 1 is really very, very, very strong, in among sort of DeFi builders. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I would say number 1, it's the core technology. Arbitrum is best-in-class technology and fully developed technology. That's technology that's live proofs running today, and the security mechanisms are actually there engaging today. That doesn't mean the technology can't grow and can't get better. Ethereum is constantly getting better. Arbitrum, with the DAO's control, can upgrade itself, and likely will upgrade itself in time. But the idea is that it's a fully mature protocol running today. And I think the technology, back to the first thing I said, those core values of why we're here, is it actually decentralized? In Arbitrum's case, that's yes. And it's not only the technology, it's also the governance. Arbitrum earlier this year launched decentralized governance, which gave the community and the power real control over the protocol, over its direction, over funding, etc. And I think that really resonates with the values of decentralization and security first. And it's also just an incredibly strong ecosystem, and there are network effects where DeFi protocols. One of the beautiful things about crypto is the ability to build an application permissionlessly, and that application just taps into others, right? So you don't need get some intermediary bank's permission and contract in order to work with them, in order to sort of join this ecosystem. You can just on your computer create an application and boom, launch it, and you are part of this massive ecosystem. And that's very encouraging for builders to be, and they want to be where the activity is. You want to tap into this ecosystem. So, there's definitely the core community, the community values, and it's a very strong community of Arbitrum builders and Arbitrum users. And I think that also attracts others to it as well, even if they're not necessarily as in tune to the core values of why some others are there, but sort of the network breeds and is attracted to others in its own right.
Cool. Thank you for that. As we're seeing DeFi innovation, we have derivatives, we have futures. Do you have a perspective on whether that's good or bad, or why either one?
I think, a lot of chains have DeFi protocols. You mentioned DEXs before, basic DeFi protocols. When it comes to DeFi innovation, what we see is Arbitrum 1 tends to be the place where people innovate and play around and give new designs. You mentioned derivatives and futures. Those are the leading, like GMX, for example. The GMX is a big derivatives protocol on Arbitrum. The leading derivatives and future players are on Arbitrum, and also other protocols from other ecosystems have come and expanded the Arbitrum network as well. So, for example, you have Trader Joe, and they expanded from Avalanche. Their first stop was Arbitrum, and many other examples of this as well from different ecosystems. And I think, again, it's, if you look at where the innovation is happening in DeFi, it's a very exciting ecosystem. And again, part of the reason is the thing I mentioned before, which is you want to be where other protocols are. What a lot of these protocols do in DeFi, they're building blocks. They don't stand alone. That's from a liquidity perspective, but it's also from a core technology perspective, right? Like, I might create a protocol that taps into a liquidity pool at Uniswap. I might create a protocol that also connects to a lending protocol, or also connects to a derivatives exchange. And the way that you can sort of look at these individual protocols, not as siloed user experiences, but building blocks that you can build on, you can connect, is one of the most, I think, empowering things about the blockchain technology and smart contracts, where you can, in a single transaction, touch all these different protocols. And you as a developer can build an experience that, without knowing who these protocols are, without knowing anyone that's running these, build an experience that taps into it, and users are there that will try it and engage and use it on the merits. And that's, I think, one of the coolest things about this space. And again, the ability to build with these building blocks. So I think the innovation is, to answer your question directly, I think the innovation happening on Arbitrum is a great thing.
Yeah, I think you pulled a good thread there. The idea that, everyone works together and they share the parts for what they're building, and then we build something stronger. I feel that in the beginning, maybe of crypto, early years, or maybe even 6 months ago, people just wanted to be on their own, right? But I think there's a greater strength in partnering together. One team does one thing from one company, another team does another thing in the developer community. And then together, when you put all those pieces, assemble all those pieces, it becomes something really amazing. So appreciate that thought process. You did also mention the developer, so I'd like to switch tracks a little bit and kind of dive into how are you enabling your developers to have a frictionless ecosystem? Like, what do you do to enable folks to succeed as a developer in your world?
So there are a few different schools of thought when it comes to developer tooling with smart contracts in crypto. I'll focus on two. There's one that says EVM, or the Ethereum virtual machine, is the sort of goal and the be all and end all, and where you want to end up. And there's a lot of good arguments for that. Number one, it's by far the most adopted technology for smart contracts, has the most smart contract library support and developers, etc., using it. Now, there are others that say, hey, we should design, there are issues with the EVM that we can fix. We should design new languages and you have teams that are building new languages, or teams that are saying, hey, let's use legacy or not, let's use existing languages that aren't smart contract languages. Like let's use languages, and you have this in all, just to name a few. You have, for example, some blockchains use the Move language, which is a language that's it's supposed to be safer than EVM and better for smart contract development from a safety perspective. You have other chains that use Rust as their native language and say, hey, you could build smart contracts in the language Rust. So let me talk about Arbitrum's technology today, and let me talk about the approach that I believe is the best approach for this. So today, Arbitrum is the best-in-class EVM chain, fully compatible with Ethereum. That's both on the surface as well as the APIs underneath. What I mean by that is like you can some software connects to the front-end APIs of what the transaction type is. Others look at the internals and tracing, etc. That actually look under the hood at not at the API and expose it, but at the core underneath the software Geth or the Go Ethereum client. Arbitrum is fully compatible in both of these. It's as the term in the industry is, it's equivalent with the EVM, with the Ethereum virtual machine. My view is, though, that EVM compatibility or EVM equivalence, if you will, is not the ceiling, it's the floor. I think that argument is correct, that you do want that. It's important to appeal to all the EVM developers and give developers that know the EVM, that have developed apps on other chains, the ability to easily and quickly develop apps on Arbitrum, and all the tooling sort of just works out of the box. But I also think if you zoom out, and you'll see that the world of EVM developers is actually quite small compared to the world of, say, Rust or C or C++ developers. And again, back to the core theme of inclusivity, the thing you want to do is, how do we be inclusive to all of these people? How do we grow the pie in a way that we're not only catering to the community EVM developers, we're also saying, hey, if you're a Rust developer, if you're a C or C++ developer, you can also build contracts, build smart contracts. You can also build experiences here. If you want to do that today, you basically have to make a choice. You can launch on Ethereum or Arbitrum using EVM, Solidity, etc. Solidity is like the main language that compiles the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine. Or you can go to sort of other blockchains that support Rust or Move or Cairo or these other languages. But we just announced something called Arbitrum Stylus, and it's in internally. We're testing it. It's mature. It's very very mature technology internally, but we haven't released it just yet. But some alpha here. Stay tuned for that. I imagine by the time, if and when this call becomes public, I imagine we'll have already released Stylus. So we're on a very short timeline to get there. But the idea with Stylus is it sort of gives you both of these. It doesn't compromise the EVM experience at all, but it adds additional language support on Arbitrum. What Stylus will add initially is Rust, C, and C++, with the best support initially for Rust. Alongside Arbitrum, alongside EVM on the same Arbitrum chain. What does that mean? It means if you are a smart contract developer today that has a smart contract in Arbitrum, and you want to upgrade to Rust, you'll be able to do that with Stylus because they use the same storage format. They're very interoperable. If you want to just say, hey, I like my Solidity contract, but there's this one piece that I wish I could rewrite in Rust, or rewrite in C, you can do that as well. You can completely mix and match these technologies. As an EVM contract, you can call out to a Rust contract and vice versa. They're fully interoperable on the same chain. And I think that's the most powerful. And to finish this thought, why would you want to do that? It turns out that Stylus has a few benefits. One is, well, maybe you're just a Rust developer and that's your comfort zone. So it is inclusive to people and developers. It's also inclusive to libraries. It turns out that languages like Rust and C and C++ have a lot more and better language support and library support when it comes to particularly advanced things like advanced cryptography or machine learning libraries and things that don't exist in the EVM. And if they did exist in the EVM, aren't performant. And that takes me to my third point. It turns out that it's a lot cheaper. And so on the Arbitrum chain, you'll get about an order of magnitude, 1 to 2 orders of magnitude advantage from using these languages, which means if you take your contract that's written in Solidity and rewrite it in Rust on the Arbitrum chain, you'll see a massive fee reduction, but it also opens up the possibility to do things that are just priced out today. So these are some of the things that we have. And again, the last point is, like I said before, We believe EVM compatibility is the floor, but there's so much more that you can do. And that's the approach that we're taking, is let's keep the best in class compatibility and equivalence with the EVM. Make, all that tooling will continue to work exactly as it does, but also include affordances for other developers to expand the ecosystem in an inclusive way. So when you go ahead and say, where do I want to build? You're not saying, well, I'll build on this chain if I use this language, or that chain if I use that chain language. You'll say, I want to build where the best ecosystem is. So I want to build on, say, Arbitrum 1, and look at this. I can use whatever language I want.
Okay, I think I understand that. I appreciate you going in so much detail there. I guess I have one more question on the way out of the developer's, thought process here. I've been doing a little bit of research. I'm seeing folks talking about applications that become chains. I'm not quite sure exactly how that applies or what that means. Can you speak a little bit about that?
So there's a trend now where a lot of what we've been talking about to date is Arbitrum technology, which is a blockchain technology, and there are live chains run by the Arbitrum DAO with this technology. So there's Arbitrum 1, which is the DeFi chain. There's Arbitrum Nova, which is a chain really focusing on gaming and social applications. And now there's a trend where, so typically, I should say, people would build applications on these chains, and that's how, there are thousands of applications built on these chains. But there's a trend now where people are saying, hey, I don't want to build an application. I want to actually build a chain of my own. Right? I want to build an entire ecosystem. And there are pros and cons of doing this. Pros are that you get sort of dedicated capacity, you get more control over the fees and some of the customizations. Maybe you want to build a chain with privacy included. Maybe you want to build a chain with advanced cryptography, somehow embedded in the chain. You can really do whatever you want if you have your own chain, and you can, decide what the fee token is of the chain. So there are a lot of customizations that you can do. The con is some of those benefits you mentioned before you don't get. One of the nice things is being on the same chain is you have all these other projects you can tap into. The interop when you're on different chains is a little more friction, has more friction as you'd expect than two applications that are building on the same chain that can much more seamlessly interact and build experiences that interact. But there is this trend where people want their own chains, some projects, and for some of them it makes sense. And Arbitrum Orbit is the name of the program where developers can go ahead and permissionlessly launch their own chains and customize it as they want using the Arbitrum technology. These are called like L3 blockchains that they can go ahead and customize and build their own chain using, again, the full stack of Arbitrum technology, but also customize it as they want and make whatever changes they want to it as well.
Sounds like a lot of freedom. So I would vote for that for sure. Lots of choices that you can make and develop what you want. Okay. I guess to round out the conversation, I would love to think about the future with you. And what do you see from here? Where do we all go here? Not necessarily for Arbitrum, but the industry itself, finance. What is next?
So I think, again, I tend to personally get very focused on who's here today and don't zoom out and see, well, it's probably very, very early. And if you zoom out, you kind of see this. There are so many there are so many builders here today, but there are so many different fields and applications that have not really adopted this technology yet. Fintech, for example, in a large way, as well as others. And definitely, though, some, a lot of Web2 enterprise companies are looking at the technology. We're in conversations. There are public conversations that are happening. So I think from an ecosystem perspective, we're going to see a lot more mainstream adoption and use cases of this technology. And the ultimate goal is you'll get to a point where you might not even be thinking about some of the underlying pieces, right? Because you're going to be using the core technology and may not even realize, oh, this is what's happening in the background. As an example, you might go ahead and order food on your phone, but you don't think about, oh, what is the underlying TCP IP protocol, right? You just think about, I'm going on my phone, going to Uber Eats, and I'm ordering food. And that's the idea of, I think, what real mainstream adoption looks like, where you're going to have applications that can use this technology in the background. It will be available for those who want to understand what's going on beneath and want to really get into the details, but it'll also be useful to those who don't. We have a lot of hurdles that we need to get over as an industry there. Primarily, I think one is UX in terms of wallet design, onboarding, et cetera. And there are some really great people that are working on these problems in the industry today. And I think these will become more and more important over time, particularly as we solve scaling. So the technology will be technically capable of handling, higher and higher capacities. And the question is, how do we onboard these people? How do we make them comfortable using this technology? So I think we're going to see many more applications and many more people. But as part of that, we'll have to see continued innovation on the user experience as well. And I think on the technology side, the same thing. You mentioned before, like ZK rollups. There's a lot of big debate today. What's better, optimistic rollups or ZK rollups, or side chains or alternative layer one chains, and many different opinions. And I can give my own, but I'll refrain. But the idea is, I think if all of us fast forward 5 years from now, I'm sure that every single one of these technology stacks will be so different and so much more developed and so much more advanced than it is today, because there's so much innovation going on in every layer and so many smart people coming into and flocking towards this industry. And it's just the way, if I look backwards 5 years at the initial Arbitrum paper, which was published in 2018. Actually, I think, funnily enough, today is the 5-year anniversary of Offchain Labs. So
congratulations on that.
Thank you. So that's just random, but that's the case. And we've learned so much in these 5 years, and I'm sure the pace of learning and pace of innovation has only increased. So if you fast forward 5 more years, we as an industry, we as a company, will learn so much more and be so much more advanced. And I think that that's going to help us solve some of these core issues. But it's easy to look at. I say as myself as a researcher, I remember looking at Bitcoin in 2013 and being, this is so upsetting. Everything interesting in the blockchain space is done already. Now, a decade later, that seems silly, but really, I remember as a researcher, like, oh, if only I were here a couple of years ago, I could have, all these ideas I had. You look back, and someone back then on the Bitcoin forum had already done this. It's like, oh, that's depressing and demoralizing. It's always easy to come into an industry and just look on the surface, like, oh, everything's done already interesting, but like, there's so much innovation happening, so much low-hanging fruit, but also deep problems that we need to work on, that I'm confident that we as an industry and a community will make good progress on. And so lots more of technical innovation and adoption to come would be my forecast.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing your crystal ball with us. When I look at that, I definitely agree that adoption is the challenge, right? Having my family who aren't in technology, who don't know crypto, how would they actually use it? How would they engage with it? And at the end of the day, it'll be some mechanism in the background where it's transparent to everybody. So I think all folks are trying to work to that goal. I would definitely be remiss if I didn't ask the AI question, so I'll go ahead and ask that. What's the impact of AI on everything you're doing and on crypto itself? Many people have different opinions which way that goes, good and bad, but what are your thoughts?
So I always think about things from my seat at the infrastructure layer, which is there are lots of smart people. I've spoken to many of them that are thinking about interactions of smart contract technology and blockchain technology and AI. And the question that I have to ask myself is, so, at the layer that we're building on, at the infrastructure layer, how do we make this possible? How do we build the sandbox where those that want to connect these technologies have the tools they need to do that? Because, and this gets back to what I said earlier, today those tools don't exist. You might want to do some, advanced machine learning or, something on chain, but like, you won't be able to today with the tools because the library support's not there, because the efficiency is not there. And that's just the state of things today. And that's one of the really exciting things about Arbitrum Stylus, which it will onboard Rust and C and C++ and ultimately any language that compiles to WebAssembly, but those will be the starting languages that the technology will support. And you'll be able now within the Arbitrum technology stack and on Arbitrum 1, should the Arbitrum DAO adopt Stylus, you'll be able to go ahead and use your off-the-shelf, Rust library for, say, for AI, and go ahead and I know Python is an important language here as well, which that will be supported off the bat. But a lot of modern languages will be supported. You'll be able to go ahead and actually build these experiences because the tools will be there. So I don't, the way my mind works, I'm not like a whiz on the application layer. There are people a lot smarter than me thinking about the interaction with these technologies. And all I think about, and the things that we think about at Offchain Labs, is how do we build the tools for these smart people to be able to implement their ideas. So what I can tell you is there are a lot of really, really smart people thinking about this, and we're thinking about, and one of the things that Arbitrum Stylus will enable in a very real way, both from a tooling perspective, but also from a bandwidth and computational cost perspective, to give people these tools to thread these two technologies together in ways that I'm sure I can't possibly imagine.
Thank you so much, Steven, for joining our community today. We really appreciate you spending time with us and going deep and answering all our questions. Just a wonderful time today. So we wish you the best of luck in the future and look forward to seeing what happens next.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for coming.
All right. Take care all. Be safe.